they exhausted the internet.
Yeah.
There was nobody left on the internet for them. And so then they had to go after a demographic that was old enough to not really be online, but they're still on TV. That's a high-class problem to have. You've exhausted the internet.
I'd say our biggest challenge at Alkimi is that the people that support the network, so the validators that we have, there's 1,200 now on the network, don't necessarily use the exchange to buy and sell ads. Advertisers and publishers do. But the thing that ties them together quite neatly is that everyone's been on the internet. And if you've been on the internet, you've been exposed to an ad. So you have your three customers, as it were. They just have slightly different entry points into the market. And I think one thing that previous blockchain ad tech companies have done, because we're not the first to, like Brave has done a very good job with their browser. You've had projects like Veracity that have their proof of view for determining whether someone's real or not that's watched a video. One thing that I think they could have perhaps done slightly better, which is, okay, there's people that spend a ton of money on advertising. They're the biggest brands in the world. They're the biggest websites in the world. They have a very distinct way of doing things. And you really have to, it's been a mantra of ours, that we wanted to meet the market exactly where it was and then kind of help them come towards where we think it should go. And I think that Venn diagram, if you want to call it that, has kind of started to come closer together. But fundamentally, the businesses that we deal with, some of them still create newspapers, some of them buy ads on those newspapers. So it's like quite unique in that you have technology that is hundreds of years old with technology that is brand new, all happening within the same building. And it's actually an important part of the way that brands reach their customers. You know, like I think you can't say for certain. I actually got in trouble with this last week. A friend of mine is chief strategy officer at Adam and Eve, and he told me off for saying this, but I don't really think you can measure the impact of outdoor advertising.
How dare you?
Yeah, he said you could, and I was like, sorry, you would know. But people still spend money on it.
Of course.
Whereas you can, and I think this is what I always thought was, because I used to do a lot of work with King and Candy Crush. I think one year they bought like 2/3 of all of the available mobile inventory because they, with the device ID, had like a really tight attribution model. They knew exactly how much to spend and when to spend it to get their install, and they had a value for each user.
Yep.
And I remember one year they started putting the gummy bears on top of phone boxes in London. And I was like, how can a business that knows how tight its attribution model is then spend money on outdoor advertising? I'm like, because obviously somewhere someone said this is going to work. Or maybe it didn't. I don't know.
I have an answer for that.
Okay, yeah.
It's the same reason they put ads on TV.
True.
It's because they exhausted the internet.
Yeah.
There was nobody left on the internet for them.
Which is a good and bad problem to have.
And so then they had to go after a demographic that was old enough to not really be online, but they're still on TV.
True, yeah. And we're seeing a bit of a revival in TV.
That's a high-class problem to have. You've exhausted the internet.
All the ads you can buy on the internet, like start looking elsewhere. But I think that the attribution model is cool. I think it's something that is now somewhat under threat. I think Apple made the very wily move of saying, okay, you can't access the device IDs anymore because we know we have a very valuable audience. I think businesses like Meta are quite lucky that Apple never quite nailed ads. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Yep. But I think that's where a wallet, particularly in games that Adam Oka develops, have a really nice way to offer a tight attribution model. Like we've often talked about wallets as a replacement for a cookie or a device ID, and I wonder if that's anything that you speak to developers about or something you're looking at. I'd be quite keen to know.
I think there are a few ways to implement this technically. I think, it's with a little schadenfreude that we see, Meta and Facebook, these guys reacting to what Apple's done, because frankly, it's just the same thing they've been doing to everybody else.
Yeah.
But Apple just walled the garden a little bit higher.
They did, yeah, a few extra ranks, yeah.
And but I think that attribution is very important. I also think that generation that was okay with sharing all of their personal information in exchange for quote unquote free services has come to an end.
I would agree.
And so I think that the current newer entrant generation, if you will, I don't think they're going to put up with that anymore. And now we're able to offer them the ability to have privacy and yet figure out how they can be in control of the value exchange of their personal information in exchange for what?
Yeah.
Because we have blockchain-based tools that allow us to do that. And we can get wonky and talk about zero-knowledge proofs and that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But I think that, as you said, whether it's a wallet or a soul-bound token or some kind of tokenized identifier, ideally with KYC behind it as well, because we're living in a world now where the signifier that you have, that decentralized identity, has the ability to access regulated financial services as well as typical consumer services. I think that's a really powerful thing, because
I agree with you.
At the end of the day, when you can provide that attribution, what you're going to do is you're going to change the user onboarding model from, vast, big funnels with huge marketing spend to push people into big funnels to distill small numbers of users that have relatively low value, to more moderate size funnels where you're going to get users at the end that have really high value.
Yeah.
Because those users are going to be completely bought into and voluntarily consuming of your services. And so you'll see the ARPU go through the roof.
Yeah.
And I think we see that already in gaming, because gaming is a little bit more sort of an early adopter audience within this ecosystem.
Yeah.
And the people we see coming through our Web3 gaming funnels are spending on the order of 100 times magnitude in terms of average revenue per user.
Yeah.
And at the same time, their retention rates go from, in mobile gaming, we would expect a 7-day retention rate of like single-digit % at best.
Yeah.
5% of the users sticking around after 7 days. Whereas now we see 50, 60, 70% of the users sticking around after 30 days.
Okay.
And why are they sticking around? Because the value proposition to them is different. They own tokens. They're stakeholders in the network of the product. And when you have a stake in the product, you have a different approach towards value. In the same way that if I ask you, how much are you going to spend to renovate the kitchen in the flat that you rent? You'll be like, well, as little as I can, because you're not renovating it for you. You're renovating it for your landlord. But if you own the flat, you're like, well, whatever I can afford, because it's my flat. Right? So ownership actually changes the proposition of retention, I think, in that respect.